At exactly 2:17 p.m., radar operators aboard a U.S. Navy destroyer noticed something that didn't belong. 14 fast-moving contacts appeared on the screen, small, aggressive, and closing in fast. Within seconds, the distance began collapsing. These weren't fishing boats. These weren't patrol craft. They were North Korean attack boats. Engines pushed to their limit. Weapons uncovered. Formation tightening. On the bridge, alarms sounded as combat systems came alive. The destroyer's sensors locked on, tracking every movement, every course change. What unfolded next wasn't a battle, but a calculated demonstration of power so overwhelming that it ended the confrontation before the first shot was fired. Within minutes, Pyongyang would realize it had made a critical mistake, because the U.S. Navy was ready, and the response would leave no doubt about who controlled the sea. At exactly 2:17 p.m., the calm of the open sea broke without warning. Inside the Combat Information Center of a U.S. Navy destroyer operating in international waters, radar screens lit up with new contacts, fast, low profile, and moving with intent. One by one, the returns multiplied until the count reached 14. 14 small craft. High speed. Direct course. These were not merchant vessels. Not fishing boats. Their acceleration patterns, spacing, and formation told a different story. Every operator in the room recognized it instantly. Fast attack boat. North Korean. The distance began closing rapidly. The boats surged forward, spreading into a loose but aggressive formation designed to overwhelm defenses through speed and numbers. At close range, such craft could carry heavy machine guns, rockets, or even explosives intended for suicide attack. On the destroyer's bridge, posture changed immediately. The ship increased readiness. Lookouts were doubled. Weapons systems transitioned from passive monitoring to active tracking. Fire control radars began assigning targets, not to fire but to prepare. This was no drill. The U.S. destroyer did not maneuver away. It held course. From Pyongyang's perspective, the move was deliberate. North Korea has long relied on swarming tactics, fast, expendable boats meant to challenge larger, technologically superior navies through sheer aggression and unpredictability. But this time, they were approaching one of the most heavily defended warships on Earth. As the boats drew closer, U.S. sensors peeled back every layer of the encounter. Electro-optical systems zoomed in, identifying hull shapes and deck layout. Electronic warfare suites listened for communications. Every engine burst, every course correction, every hesitation was analyzed in real time. The destroyer's combat system built a complete picture in seconds. 14 targets, 14 firing solutions. One command away from irreversible escalation. Still, no shots were fired. Instead, the U.S. Navy prepared to demonstrate something far more terrifying than immediate violence. The North Korean boats continued their advance, unaware, or unwilling to believe, what they were sailing into. From their decks, the American destroyer appeared massive but silent. No warning shots. No visible reaction. That silence was misleading. Because beneath the steel deck, vertical launch systems stood ready. Close-in weapon systems tracked automatically. Missile defenses, guns, and electronic countermeasures were synchronized into a single lethal network. A system designed for war. At 2:17 p.m., the line had been crossed, not with gunfire, but with intent. What followed would end the confrontation without a single shot being fired. And it would leave Pyongyang with a message it would not soon forget. As the 14 fast boats continued their approach, the U.S. destroyer made its first move. Not with fire, but with control. Deep inside the ship, the combat system transitioned into full engagement mode. Fire control radars quietly activated, locking onto each individual craft. The system didn't see 14 boats anymore. It saw 14 solved problems. Range, speed, heading. Weapon envelopes calculated. Time to impact measured in seconds. Every North Korean boat was now tracked, prioritized, and assigned a response. On the surface, the destroyer still appeared calm. No warning shots. No sudden turns. But the air around it changed. Electronic warfare systems came alive, flooding the spectrum with signals the small boats couldn't interpret, but could feel. Radios crackled. Navigation systems began behaving strangely. On the North Korean boats, confusion set in. Their crews had expected intimidation. They had expected hesitation. Instead, they were sailing straight into a warship that wasn't reacting the way smaller navies usually did. Then came the moment that changed everything. The U.S. destroyer illuminated them. Not with weapons fire, but with unmistakable targeting sensors. High-precision radar sweeps and electro-optical tracking systems locked on openly now, no longer hidden. From the decks of the fast boats, American systems were suddenly visible, turning, tracking, following every move. It was a message without words. We see you. We have you. And we are ready. At the same time, the destroyer altered speed, just slightly. Enough to demonstrate maneuvering dominance. Enough to show that even if the boats rushed in, the ship could reposition, keep distance, and still maintain firing solutions. This wasn't a standoff anymore. It was a demonstration. U.S. naval doctrine is clear in moments like this. Escalation control is as important as firepower. The goal isn't to start a war. It's to convince the other side that continuing would be suicidal. And the destroyer did exactly that. Missile systems stood armed beneath the deck. The main gun trained silently. Close-in weapon systems tracked automatically, capable of shredding fast boats in seconds if ordered. From Pyongyang's side, the picture was suddenly very different. 14 boats against one ship now felt less like a show of force, and more like a trap. The boats began to hesitate. Formation loosened. Speed fluctuated. Some craft adjusted course slightly, testing whether the American ship would react. It didn't. Because it didn't need to. The destroyer had already won the psychological battle. Every second that passed made the risk clearer. One wrong move. One aggressive turn. One misunderstood signal, and none of the 14 boats would make it home. The sea grew quiet again, but this time the silence carried fear. And then, almost imperceptibly, the advance slowed. The moment of decision arrived without a single command being spoken. As the U.S. destroyer maintained its course, North Korean commanders watching the situation unfold began to realize a hard truth. Their show of force had failed. The American ship had not backed down. It had not warned. And it had not panicked. Instead, it had done something far more dangerous. It had waited. That patience was devastating. The destroyer's sensors now tracked every fast boat continuously. Fire control solutions refreshed in real time. From a tactical standpoint, the engagement was already over. Only the final order was missing. On the North Korean boats, crews could feel it. Targeting systems turned toward them with deliberate precision. The massive radar arrays of the destroyer rotated openly, no longer concealing intent. Optical sensors followed individual craft, locking on as if counting down. This was no longer a test. It was a warning. The boats slowed. Not all at once, but unevenly. One craft reduced speed. Another drifted slightly off course. Formation discipline began to break down, the hallmark of uncertainty spreading through the group. That hesitation was everything. In naval combat, hesitation kills. From the U.S. Navy's perspective, this was the exact outcome doctrine is designed to achieve. The goal was never destruction, it was dominance. To force the adversary to recognize on their own that continuing forward would end badly. And North Korea recognized it. Commanders aboard the fast boats understood what they were facing. A single U.S. destroyer carried more firepower than their entire formation combined. Its guns could engage multiple targets simultaneously. Its close-in weapons could shred fast craft before they reached effective range. Missiles wouldn't even be necessary. One mistake, and the sea would become a graveyard. Then it happened. The lead boats altered course. Subtle at first. A few degrees off heading. Enough to test whether the destroyer would respond aggressively. It didn't. Because it didn't have to. The message had already landed. Within moments, the change spread through the formation. Speed dropped further. Spacing widened. What had once been an aggressive advance now looked like a confused withdrawal. And then the retreat began. One by one, the boats turned away, not suddenly, not dramatically, but decisively. Engines that had pushed forward at full power now carried them back toward the horizon. The destroyer held its course. No pursuit. No taunting. No victory signal. Just calm. For Pyongyang, the lesson was unmistakable. The U.S. Navy had demonstrated that escalation would be answered instantly and overwhelmingly, but only if forced. The confrontation ended the same way it began. Silently. But the fear it created would last far longer than the encounter itself. When the North Korean fast boats finally turned away, the confrontation ended, but the message did not. For Pyongyang, the most unsettling part of the encounter wasn't the retreat. It was how easily it had been forced. The U.S. Navy destroyer never fired a shot, never issued a public warning, never escalated beyond posture and presence. Yet 14 attack boats, sent to intimidate, had been neutralized psychologically in minutes. That outcome deeply unsettled North Korean planners, because it exposed a critical vulnerability in their strategy. North Korea's naval doctrine relies heavily on asymmetry, cheap, fast, aggressive platforms meant to overwhelm larger forces through speed, numbers, and unpredictability. Against smaller regional navies, this approach has worked before. But against a modern U.S. destroyer, the encounter proved something Pyongyang could no longer ignore. Numbers did not matter. Aggression did not matter. Even intent did not matter. Only capability did. The destroyer had demonstrated total control of the engagement space. It had seen the attack forming long before it became visible. It had tracked, analyzed, and solved every possible outcome before the boats ever reached threatening distance. From Pyongyang's perspective, this was alarming. It meant that future encounters would unfold the same way, only faster. And next time, restraint might not be guaranteed. Intelligence analysts later noted subtle but significant changes in North Korean naval behavior following similar incident. Patrol patterns shifted. Swarm tactics were used more cautiously. Fast boats avoided close approaches to U.S. and Allied warships unless under heavy oversight. The confidence was gone. Because the illusion had been shattered. The illusion that boldness alone could offset technological inferiority. For the U.S. Navy, the encounter validated decades of doctrine. Dominance does not require destruction. The most effective deterrence is convincing the adversary that escalation is futile before it begins. And that is exactly what happened. By refusing to overreact, the destroyer forced North Korea to confront a simple truth. Any real engagement would be one-sided, fast, and catastrophic. There would be no heroic clash. No symbolic victory. Only loss. That realization travels far beyond the crews involved. It reaches command centers, intelligence briefings, and future planning rooms. It shapes decisions long after the ships have disappeared beyond the horizon. This is how modern deterrence works, not through fear of war, but fear of certainty. Certainty of defeat. Certainty of exposure. Certainty that the other side is always one step ahead. The encounter at 2:17 p.m. never made headlines at the time. But for Pyongyang, it quietly redrew the boundaries of what was possible at sea. And those boundaries have not moved since. By the time the last North Korean fast boat disappeared beyond the horizon, the encounter was already over. But its consequences were only beginning. What happened at 2:17 p.m. was not a battle, not even a clash. It was a demonstration of modern naval power in its purest form. No missiles launched. No guns fired. Yet the balance of the situation was decided completely and irreversibly. This is how wars are prevented today. The U.S. destroyer didn't win by aggression. It won by clarity, Clarity of capability, clarity of intent, and clarity of consequence. North Korea's commanders were forced to confront the reality that escalation would not lead to negotiation, symbolism, or propaganda victory. It would lead to destruction. And that certainty is what stopped them. For Pyongyang, the encounter reinforced a dangerous lesson. Modern naval warfare no longer rewards bravery alone. Speed, numbers, and intimidation mean nothing against an adversary that can see first, decide first, and act first. The destroyer's silence was deliberate. Its restraint was calculated. Every second it waited increased pressure on the attacking boat. Every moment without reaction made the next possible reaction more terrifying. This is deterrence at work. The most powerful weapon on board wasn't a missile or a gun, it was confidence. Confidence built on decades of training. Confidence built on layered defenses. Confidence built on the knowledge that if conflict began, it would end quickly. Encounters like this happen more often than the public realizes. They rarely make headlines. They are quietly logged, analyzed, and filed away. But for the nations involved, they leave lasting impressions. North Korea did not retreat because it was ordered to. It retreated because it understood. Understood that the U.S. Navy had already won the moment the boats were detected. Understood that pushing forward would only prove a point no one needed proven. And understood that next time, restraint might not be offered. At sea, power is not measured by who fires first, but by who never has to. The destroyer sailed on. The boats returned home. The world never noticed. But for those watching closely, the message was clear. At 2:17 p.m., the line between provocation and catastrophe appeared briefly, and then vanished. Because one side knew exactly how far it could go, and the other side knew exactly when to stop.